Welcome to Love for Life, the podcast for modern couples who want to build relationships that last while raising families that thrive.
We're Nicole and Ben Farrow. Nicole's the expert and I'm the other half of this partnership, bringing the everyday perspective of a guy doing the work alongside you.
Every week we cut through the BS and give you the real tools for real life, because your relationship isn't just personal, it's the foundation for everything. Let's get into it.
In this week's episode of the podcast, we're talking about money. It is such a contentious issue for so many of us, particularly in relationships, and it literally touches on absolutely everything. Research shows that it's still the number one cause of tension in relationships, and 40% of us admit to hiding finances from our partner, which is just staggering. It's understandable then why it causes so much friction. So for this episode, we are actually joined by somebody who knows all about this, Philly Ponniah, who is a financial advisor and works with couples to bridge the gap between turning money from a stress point into a shared vision. We're going to be talking about mindset, meaning, power, financial disclosure, prenups, how to build wealth, and how to undo those money mindsets that are perhaps holding us back from the stories we're telling each other from our childhood, and how we prevent our children from inheriting our own money struggles or mindset that we have. Now, you will notice that on this episode, it's just me. There's no Ben. Reason being is I've actually known Philly for a little while, and Ben knows all too well that when I know somebody that he cannot get a word in edgeways. So he has gracefully bowed out of this episode, but we'll be back again next week. So whether you're newly married, juggling careers, kids, or just thinking about the legacy you want to leave, or want to deal with your own money issues or your own money mindset, there is so much in this episode. Philly really is a source of so much truth and some of the hard conversations that we all need to have with ourselves and those we love around money. So enjoy.
Money is such a difficult topic for lots of reasons and so many people. And it's amazing how difficult it is, even within relationships.
Yeah, definitely. Just because most people don't even stop to think about their own relationship with money, let alone two people coming together in a relationship and bringing all their background of, what they've heard about money growing up, what were the dynamics at home around money. So you're kind of one person on their own may not have solved their own issues around money before joining forces with someone else. And then I think quite often if people then haven't spoken about it or had a conversation around it facilitated, then you can actually go years without getting to the bottom of how could this actually work well together? How can we actually kind of delve into our money stories, work out what's going on and what might be causing that argument that happens every time one of the parties goes to spend and the other one feels, attacked or really unsafe around money, because a lot of people feel if money has been a source of stress or scarcity in their childhood, even if they are earning well as an adult, any spending that's sort of outside their control might feel very stressful and like an attack.
Yeah.
So I see that with couples where one's a spender and one's a saver. And if they haven't spoken about, what they want to do together with the money, even if they have money that's sort of separately theirs, it can feel quite stressful and quite charged. And be a source of stress and argument.
Yeah. So what are the conversations that people should be having up front, and when should they be having these conversations? Because as you say, quite rightly, people can go years without having these conversations. And I guess if you look at how relationships have evolved and the relationships we're in today, because go back a couple of generations and there was a provider and there was a homemaker, and therefore the homemaker probably didn't get involved or wasn't expected to get involved as much with money. Obviously times have changed and you now have dual income couples, or you have certainly two incomes coming into a relationship or a marriage before perhaps children come along. And yet, so this is quite a new phenomenon in terms of having to talk about money, perhaps where it hasn't necessarily been needed in previous generations. So when are we supposed to be having those conversations, and how do you approach those conversations or do that work that you were talking about up front around your own money mindset?
Well, I think you can do it in quite a gentle way in early dates, and even things like, who's going to pay on dates, and it doesn't necessarily, pave the way for how things are going to be forever. But I do think a question I like is, if you won £10 million in the lottery, what would you do with it? Because that often shows deep down how someone feels about money, but it also shows them what they actually like in life. Most people don't get that freedom, that idea of expansive thinking of what is possible. And I think if someone's grown up with money, they might just sort of say, oh, I might invest some of it, I might do a holiday, but they might sort of be, you might say, sensible with it. And someone who maybe hasn't had money might describe spending it all or giving it all away. And it's quite a telling answer that you can get when you're asked that question. So I quite like more sort of philosophical questions to sort of ease people into it. Then actually just talking about, was money spoken about at home, like with your parents? Just questions that like I mentioned what I earned on my first date with my husband. I don't remember doing this, but he's brought it up a few times. And I think I wanted to set out that, I'm totally fine on my own. That was me signaling kind of independence. I didn't need to be meeting someone from a money point of view. And actually, I think talking about things like what you earn, perhaps not on your first date, I might not repeat that now, but I think talking about money, and sort of, I always think when I'm talking about money is sort of thinking about what do you actually enjoy doing, what do you value, and that can be quite a good way of connecting with a partner. So early on, you can kind of talk about numbers. It can be ballpark. It doesn't have to be, I get exactly this amount. But I think you can find there are some people who earn a lot of money and actually don't want to share it and can also be quite frugal. So just because someone's got a high salary, you want to make sure that if you're going to be marrying this person and still working, that there's going to be some sort of generosity between you, because that can also be a source of stress. There's sort of all sorts of control that can happen in relationships around money as well. And actually, I think getting on the same page around intentions around money, I get a lot of questions on how much should we both be putting into the central pot? I earn a lot more than my husband, or there's that sort of imbalance. And I think it can be fine before children if you just put in what's needed into a central pot. But I think once you've had children, there needs to be more going in centrally, because there's always extra things that crop up, and that usually then tends to fall on the person who's at home more with the children, which typically is often the women, not always obviously, but more often than not. And then there can be quite an imbalance. So if you haven't had the conversations up front around contribution to the household, things that are fair but also that feel right as a family, I think it's not just about putting in a percentage of what you earn, because sometimes you can find that one party actually has a lot of money on the side that's theirs and the other person can be disadvantaged in that way. So I think it's finding a balance in the household that works, where the resentment doesn't build. So being upfront, essentially.
Yeah. If we go right back to the start of this, so you're sitting in a date, what are the red flags of, if you were having that conversation initially? And I love if you won 10 million, I have that conversation almost on a weekly basis when I do a lottery ticket, which Ben's like, when the chances of winning the lottery, you could have invested that money probably. But then that says something about us, me being the eternal optimist. But when you're on that first date, when you're first starting out, what are the red flags in terms of like what you said around what comes around generosity and spending? And like, how do you kind of suss that out if this is going to be a problem? And perhaps it's not even in the dating. Maybe it's when you're starting to go a bit further down the line of sharing your life together. Like, what are the red flags that people should be going, hold on a minute, this isn't good. We're on totally different pages. And can people get on the same page, even if they have a totally different value set? Because I think what you're saying is it comes a lot down to values and our own conditioning, which is just the same on basically anything to do with having a human connection with anyone. Particularly with money, because it is so charged and it is so difficult for some people to have that conversation. And I think that's partly to do with the way that we live and the fact that it has been kind of frowned upon to sort of discuss money. And so actually I think kudos to you to say, actually, I'm an independent woman. I don't need you, but I like you. So I will see you again.
Yeah. Let's have a second date.
Very empowering. I love that. But, why is it so difficult? And what are the red flags that people should kind of go, oh?
Well, so given that our relationship with money is formed before the age of 7, I never want to put any blame anywhere. It's just kind of what you're working with. But you'll see a few different behaviours in adults around money. And possibly, if you didn't have any money growing up, you might then be earning a good amount and spend a lot. And that could be, taking someone on flashy dates and whisking them away and actually spending lots of money. And for me, I'm not sure I'd say it's a red flag, but that's the sort of thing where you would probably want that person to sort the root cause of that overspending before you join up with them, because you may find actually that they've got a lot of credit card debt, or they're spending a lot to keep up with an image and a lifestyle that actually probably isn't right for the level that they're earning at, or they might be able to afford it, but longer term they're not going to be building up some wealth for the family. So I think I definitely look and see that sort of spending angle, because it can feel very nice to be treated and whisked away and romantic, and there is sort of a place for some of that. But I think you've also got to say, is this spending sustainable? Is this what we want to value as a household? Is this going to get us to, even just thinking about spending loads on a wedding? I like that more people are speaking now about, should we actually have a slightly smaller wedding and then, put it towards a first house together or something. I think people are getting focusing a little bit more on what the money could actually go to instead. So I'd say behaviours around money is definitely a big one. And you could also see that with, not wanting to spend anything, but it doesn't matter if you don't spend anything, if you're then imaginative and go and sort of have nice picnics outside. And so it's not really about the money, but it's almost like, what's the messaging behind it? What's their wiring like? Because you can change, absolutely can change, but you've got to want to change, and you've got to want to delve into, why do you behave in this way? So if you are spending a lot, almost like prove something, then that's probably not going to be coming from the most healthy place. But if you're willing to work on that and say, actually, this person will love me and can love me if I show off and we do something really sort of wholesome, versus doing something sort of whisking them away, champagne somewhere, you can, and that can almost be a sort of mask. Then you might think that that's why they are going out with you. But if you can kind of get to the bottom of why you're doing that, then I think you can change. And set the relationship off in the right direction. It takes a bit of bravery, but it can be done. Then in terms of sort of other red flags, so it's like the overspending, the not spending. And then I think you can tell a lot about how people are with others. And again, not necessarily with money, but with time, perhaps, like who they're choosing to spend their time with. Do they do things with their family? There are lots of things that are indicators of how they might be as a partner, sort of long term. And it's just seeing, is this modeling something that you saw in your childhood that you like? Is it modeling something different which you also like? So it's just, I guess, checking in with what you want your future household to look like, with or without children. I think it's just, for me, it always comes down to values and matching. And most people end up with someone the opposite to them around money. You typically get a spender and a saver. And so as long as you can talk it through and set your boundaries, set your budgets, set the sort of goals as a household, otherwise that can see things disintegrate quickly. Anything to do with gambling, any sort of addictive personality, those things need addressing quickly. Otherwise, I've seen sort of some real harm caused around secret spending, financial infidelity, that can really often, unless they're both willing to repair, be irreparable.
Yeah. So we'll come back to financial infidelity, because
all these heavy topics
I really want to get into, but I just want to come back to love bombing at the start, which you're kind of referring to, which has kind of got a bit of a bad connotation to it now anyway. And I think people are moving more to, particularly in the, when they're coming together around emotional intelligence and trying to align more on values. But what about the work that, because you said we all come into relationships with our own money stories, with our own money beliefs, and a lot of those can be limiting depending on what we've grown up around. How does someone work on those, either in a relationship or outside a relationship? How do you do that work that's specifically on your own? If you know that you don't have a great relationship with money, or you know that you feel unsafe around money, or that you can't hold on to money, what's the work that you suggest people go through, and the kind of the self-reflection, I guess, and self-discovery around that?
Yeah. So this is where I start with every client I work with, whether it's an individual or a couple. But with the couples, when I work with couples, I actually do a session individually first, because this can be quite deep work. And even if you're in a couple and you're happy to talk about it, you always want that space to just think about it individually first. And that's where you go back to those early childhood memories. Like, what's your first memory of money? How would you describe money now? So I do lots of talks, and often I just get people to shout out, money is, and some people will say things like freedom, independence, and others will say scarce or stressful. And it's always sort of a good indicator straight away is like what naturally comes up for you then. For some people, it'll be a positive word and a negative word because there's conflicting things going on inside. But I'll get people to think about, their first memory of money. It might be putting money in the collection at church. It might be getting pocket money, but not being allowed to spend it on what you want. Or it could be opening your first bank account and having a check to pay in, but then you weren't allowed to spend that money. Or some people were made to give to charity. It's just tuning in, and then like how you felt. Some people remember being given like a pound coin by a grandparent, to go on holiday with. There's all these sorts of some happy, some slightly stressful memories. Sometimes it's parents who used to argue, or if your parents broke up and then you were living with one of the parents and then there was no money given by the other parent. There are all sorts of sort of more stressful situations that so it's tuning in and remembering what those early memories are, how you felt, and seeing if it kind of comes up almost in part of your body. Sometimes you can really feel it somewhere. So it's really that first stage of awareness, and a lot of people haven't actually gone back to those early memories. They might be in their 40s and they've never really thought about it. And I find there's often light bulbs straight away from there, and they say, that's probably why I want to spend all my money on payday, because I was never allowed to spend the pocket money I got, or not opening letters from the bank because it's sort of almost like something that was a bit shameful at home or not talked about, and actually you want to avoid it. My mum used to work for the Citizens Advice Bureau, so she'd always come home and tell us these really sad stories of debt where people hadn't understood things like APR and just really how much it cost them to borrow. So that's always had an impact on me, not wanting to borrow money, because you think I'd only heard horror stories basically of people who'd had credit cards or taken loans out. So it's just remembering what it is, and then once you realize what that then translates to as an adult, not talking about the behaviors now, but just almost like what does that tell you about money, it's then questioning if that's true. So if you think money is scarce, well, is that true? Can you see some examples where it isn't? And if you've grown up in a religious setting, or even looking at Disney, all the villains are rich, you can see quite a lot of references in culture and religion where money is seen as a bad thing, root of all evil. There are all these things which you won't have realized at the time, but subconsciously can be still sending you subliminal messages. So it's actually then questioning if the message you then heard is true. And from that position of awareness, you can then start challenging it, looking for evidence that it's not true, and then start to work out what identity you want money to have. What do you want it to be saying to you? What do you want your household to feel around money? So, and I sort of speak to people about how you then talk to your children around money, because if you think you didn't have any money growing up, but then your children are likely to be in a different position, it's just sort of how you then think about the value of money as well for them, which is another interesting angle.
Yeah. Just as you're talking, and I thought I'd done this work, unsurprisingly, given the kind of industry I'm in. I've done a lot of work around my own money mindset, and I thought I'd got it. Like I knew what all my kind of money stories were, but even just listening to you then, I'm going, oh yeah, and that one. And that one. My parents couldn't be in the same room as one another until my dad stopped paying maintenance, because it was constant tension of dad having to pay mum, and there was a lot of resentment of the end of the marriage. So it was a constant source of stress for the both of them. Mum always thought he should be paying more. Dad thought he'd pay the bare minimum because she'd had the affair. And until I was 16, it was just a constant battle. And it'd be a case of, you need new school shoes, ask your dad. I got the last ones. Or no, ask your mum. And that was, and do you know what? I'd almost completely forgotten about that until you just said about it. Because my thing with money was, I remember my sister used to hold her hand out for her pocket money from my dad, who loved him to bits, and God rest his soul, but he was really tight. And we all laugh about the fact that dad used to squeak when he walked because he was so tight. And you'd go out for a coffee and he'd go, how much?
Yeah.
It was constant. And we all laugh about it now, and we did then as well. But my sister would stand there with her hand held out, demanding her pocket money from my dad, who would just erupt. I think, to be fair, the way she asked for it was quite brazen, but it meant that I never asked for my pocket money. I'd want to buy something, and my mum would be like, well, where's your pocket money from your dad? And I'm like, oh, I haven't got it. And my dad probably got away with not paying me loads because I never asked for it.
But I wonder if that, and thank you for sharing that, I wonder if that plays up now.
100%. I hate having to have money conversations or ask for money, even from clients who are supposed to be paying me. I don't like to ask for money. I don't like putting my pricing out there. I find it really, really hard to ask for money. And I know I can go back every time I have to ask for money today. I go back and I'm standing in my dad's kitchen and my sister stood there with her hand held out, and I can see my dad erupting, and I can see me kind of, going smaller and smaller, like not wanting to be there. And I can see it so clearly every single time. So I thought it was all to do with that, but actually there was so much more going on. But you don't realize, you think it's just one money story, but actually there's so much. And I said, I've done some of this work, and still I'm talking to you today and discovering other things that were showing up at the time. And I'm very, very aware of, as you say, what I say to my children, which I know I slip up on. And when because children are constantly asking, can I have this? Can I have that? Can I have the other? And it's how do you answer those questions? Because it's kind of talked about quite a lot now, isn't it? We're the generation of parents who are trying to heal and do things differently whilst and break those cycles that we're now very aware of, that perhaps haven't done us, no disrespect to our parents, they weren't aware, but haven't done us a good turn. And now we're trying to not do it to our children, but trying to heal through that process at the same time. So we do mess up. What do you say to children now if you are in a different situation to the one you were in?
So never to say you can't afford something. Never to say that. It all comes down to values. So I find that's a really good way to frame it, of what do we value as a household? And then, yes, we can afford that. We're not choosing to spend on that. Or if we spend on that, we then won't do this. And it's that you can start it from quite early, that idea of this or that. What are we going to choose to spend on? It's that sort of more positive language, as opposed to stop asking, we can't afford that. And I was speaking to someone whose son had needed new school shoes, and he kind of made a comment about not wanting to almost like ask for, and she felt so bad that she'd made him feel bad for asking for it. So I think it's just saying, there's some things we have to buy, and then there's some things we can choose to spend our money on. And you can start quite young with almost making it a bit fun for them. So here's £10, so we're going to go and bake some things. What should we go and, what ingredients can we buy with this? And then it's like that instead of something else. But just kind of getting them to understand money, because everything is done on a card, tapping. Even if I go on the tube with my eldest, he'll kind of put his watch, he's 4, he'll put his watch as if to go through the thing, because he's seen people. I don't do that with my watch, but it's amazing what they're picking up. That's not coins. So it's very difficult to actually know what something costs, really, if it just comes in.
That's a really good point, actually. Because one of my friends, they have a purse of just change. And when they go out for dinner or anything like that, and the kids are sort of sitting there waiting for their dinner, they will play with the money and they'll pretend that one of the bank or whatever, and they will add up and exchange. How much can I buy this fork for? And they use the money to, I don't have any change. I think that's a brilliant idea, and they want to play with the money and they know what the money is. But yeah, you're right. Probably by the time our children are, going out into the world to earn, there won't be money.
Yeah.
That's a bit sad.
Well, I mean, different topic, the cashless society hurts the kind of people, not so in the mainstream. So but I think even just for learning, so I think things like choosing what you want to spend your money on in half term, because all these days can add up if you don't think about it. So actually almost saying, like, what are we going to choose? And you can do it with sort of different colours to start off with. It doesn't have to be numbers, but whatever's going to be age appropriately, basically. But I think you can talk to your children quite young, because I get a lot of people saying or asking me, should I put money into a junior ISA? It'll become theirs completely aged 18. I don't want them going off and spending it all, frittering it away type thing. And I say, well, actually, you can be responsible for talking about money as they grow up, where they are giving some money to charity. You can give them a pot that is when they have the school day where they're in fancy dress, or when they're doing something, they can take in the money for that and understand that part of what they get, they give. But also making sure that you do have some money for something fun. Like I always say, and I don't particularly like budgets, but if you kind of have a spending plan, in that you want the pot for something fun so that you don't feel restricted, but then you've also got the money for the thing that's going to tick the box of satisfying a longer term value. And I think, you can speak about that from, again, quite a young age. You're going to get some money when you're 18. You can either start saying, this will be towards education, but it's totally theirs. But if you're sort of talking about it in a values-based way, from quite early, there's always then a learning and an expectation that, yeah, some of it can be for something fun and also for something longer term, because especially if it's invested and going to be growing, it doesn't mean they have to sell the investments when they're 18. They can actually keep them invested long term, or take a bit out, sell some holdings, or, when they're 25 and want something different, they can sell some down then. So I think it's how you have the conversations from early. And I would definitely use a junior ISA, the tax benefits, and also just the fact that it can grow and until they're 18 be shielded. So it's not in a savings pot that can just be dipped into. I think it's quite.
Yeah, that's really good. So actually on that, because I keep seeing all over social media at the moment that the way to successfully money plan is to have 4 bank accounts. This seems to be the thing at the moment that's everywhere.
Right.
Like you have to have 4 bank accounts. One's joint and one's one each, and then one's like the fun or the savings. So what is your advice on what does a successful sort of setup look like for a couple, perhaps with children, who are wanting to be able to do that kind of spend, save, enjoy
I would
life?
Definitely have a central pot that has more in it than the necessities. So I actually put my salary, and my husband puts his salary, put that all into one joint pot. Some people then choose to take a bit out each individually, and I think it can work quite well if you've got different earners that at different levels putting kind of the majority into a central pot and then both taking out a set amount each. I think that can really help, especially if there's like a maternity leave where one party doesn't earn as much for a certain period of time, where it feels more fair. Otherwise, I have known some. I remember speaking to one woman who said that her husband was on a golf holiday at the end of maternity leave, and she was asking him if she could buy a cup of coffee out, and it made me so cross and sad that was how unequal it was. So I think definitely having more going into a central pot. You can each individually take some out if you want to have some sort of anonymity around your spending. People sometimes like that if they're going to buy a present for their other half, or just be able to feel fine to go to the pub on a Friday after work, or do whatever you want to do. And then both individually having ISAs. So you'll want to have some cash saved for an emergency fund if anything crops up, but then for longer term money that you can set aside for more than 5 years. The stocks and shares ISA is definitely the first place to start, just because of the tax benefits and the long-term growth there.
You mentioned financial anonymity, and also we did touch on financial infidelity earlier.
Yeah.
What's the kind of rule of thumb in terms of how much of the money you share and how transparent you are about money? And should it be a case of everything unless you're buying a present for one another? What does success look like in terms of that visibility of money?
Well, I think trust plays a big part. And some people will set limits. So if I'm going to spend more than £500, I'll say to my husband, for example, and others will say anything over £100, whatever works for your household. But it's all about open dialogue. I think communication is key. So it doesn't really matter what it is, but it's having agreements around it. If you don't trust your partner, which might be a sign of worse things to come, then you might want to start putting some money aside that's just yours, just to have the option to change your situation if you need to. I think that is fine. But if you're in a kind of healthy relationship where you're both open with each other, then I don't think there actually is particularly the need to be separate with your finances if you don't want to be. And some feminists will not like that. I definitely class myself a feminist, but I think if you're able to be open around your money, then it should be okay that you're together and transparent with it. I've seen some really awful scenarios where there's been secret spending and huge debts run up. And I think debt is a big conversation to probably have early on before getting married to someone, because when you join, you take on each other's financial positions. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. But if someone has got a large amount of debt, or you've got a joint account and then they leave and then they kind of run up money on a credit card, that is your shared debt. Can be quite devastating for people, actually. It all comes back to conversation and telling a bank if you think that's happening, and they can put a limit on spending. That's obviously in the case of things disintegrating. But a lot of these things aren't spoken about, and there's a lot of shame around money. So actually, people might not want to say, well, actually, I've got £20,000 on 2 credit cards. And if they're then not looking at it, they might not see that they're paying 24.5% interest on it every year. And, I had a client I was working with recently who had quite a large amount of debt, and she was still getting letters through saying, oh, take us up on our offer of extending this credit limit to an extra few £1,000s, act quickly, we might not offer it again. And I think it's really bad that banks can write in that way. Even things like the next credit card. A lot of people have those credit cards, and not only is it a high interest rate, but they'll kind of extend the credit limit. And if people are only paying off the minimum amount, it adds up so much. So I've got a bit of a bugbear about credit limits being extended, because I think people they almost think, oh, I've been told I have to accept it, and then they spend it. So people's debt positions as a really important one, and actually to seek help. There are some good charities out there who will help you work out, what's the interest on this, which one should I pay off first, pay down.
Yeah, and actually we'll include those in the show notes for anyone who needs them, because you're right, debt is a huge problem. And I don't think that a lot of people realise that, when they get together, that they are actually liable for that as well.
And even in high earners. So it's people tend to think, oh, people are going to debt who don't have very much money. But actually, you can find, if you've tried to keep up with a lifestyle, if your friends are earning more than you, even if it's only a bit more, if the activities that are chosen are spending 3 going out somewhere versus 50, it really depends who you surround yourself with. It's very easy to go on a holiday that costs more than you would like to spend because you don't want to be seen to be saying no. And so again, that's probably where a little bit of work on values, what matters to you, if you were to fast forward 3 years, is that really what you wanted to have spent on? And that can sometimes add a bit of perspective, because in the moment you want to be included.
Yeah.
And most people don't mind if you say, actually, I'm saving for something at the moment, or you don't need to tell them you're in debt. You can just say, and I kind of help clients almost like practice these things so that you can feel comfortable saying it, because people won't mind if you say, actually, can we just go for a coffee, or let's go for a walk? You don't need to go and spend £50 on lunch out.
No, and actually it's the saying no. It's really hard, isn't it? Because actually we don't like to say no, because we feel like we'll be excluded if we say no, which comes down to a very basic primal instinct of there's only safety in the herd kind of thing. So yeah, the idea of saying no or being shunned or pushed out is just too big a risk to say no. But you also see that as well around, I know Martin Lewis does a big thing every Christmas about reciprocal presents, when you end up buying people stuff that you can't really afford at Christmas, and that are kind of overspending because you feel obliged to, because they've bought you something. And sometimes the kinder thing is to not buy someone a gift, which seems really counterintuitive, but actually, depending on people's financial situation or what they are saving for or what their values are or whatever, it can put a lot of pressure on people. What about prenups and that sort of thing? Because they're becoming a lot more popular nowadays, even with young people who, before they've built wealth. I think before there was kind of this concept that, or this perception that prenups were only for the wealthy. But are you seeing a lot more of that now in the work that you're doing with clients in terms of that sort of future proofing and thinking ahead?
Yeah, I think unfortunately there are so many divorces now that there's often one side of the couple who's more keen to have it, and it's not because they want the marriage to break down, they're just being sensible. I sometimes see a parent of one of the parties saying, you have to get a prenup. And I often think, if they haven't had the conversations around money, actually the marriage will probably disintegrate anyway, unfortunately. I think it's such a key driver that either, resentment or control, power, there's so much thing to be wrapped up in it, that if you haven't had those early conversations, that you can't help but then have friction later on. So sometimes actually saying, let's get a prenup, brings the problem to the fore, and that can be helpful. So I am seeing couples coming, and I always do a session each individually, tapping into that money story, what matters to them, how they actually want to feel around money as adult, what behaviours they want to have, because that's often when you can tell that they're not on the same page. Doesn't mean they can't be, but actually that's why it's good to sort of in that safe space individually to chat. And then we have 2 sessions together. And it's not about where they're going to put their investments. We can go on to sort of think about if they want to kind of bring their money together and be longer term planners around it. But it's actually that side of things around values. Are they thinking about children? What are the things they want to teach their children? What are the things they want to aim towards? Most people won't say, oh, I want a £10 million pot. Most people will say it's qualitative things. It's aspects of their life, like, well, I'd love to be there in school holidays. And actually, sometimes you kind of revisit these conversations once children arrive, because it's almost like you don't understand it until they do arrive, essentially. But I think things like contributions to the household are very important on a non-monetary basis, because there might be times when one is earning more, one isn't earning, and actually how they still feel valued, because actually money is not the only thing that comes into a house. So it's just trying to think about it's quite philosophical, but it's also practical, because I want people to walk away from it thinking, okay, this is a really good conversation. Or even things like what gifts you give, your love language, the things that you might keep giving presents, and actually that's not how the person wants to be told that they're loved. Might be quality time. I think the love language is a really important one as well.
Very much so. And you're completely right. It does lead into so much resentment when you're not on the same page on all of these kind of topics. And as you say, money is one of those things where it does lead into so much around control and power, and that can shift throughout the relationship as well, particularly if you have children. I was the main breadwinner before we had children, but then obviously I stepped back a bit because of wanting to be around for the children, and then Ben was, and that's quite a common story in the terms of the ebbs and flows and of working and having those conversations. And it's interesting because so often I think prenups are given such a bad rep, and people can really react badly to a prenup. And as you say, it's usually one person who is instigating it, and that in itself, in terms of couples, can be a bit of a red flag if the reaction is so against a prenup and won't entertain the conversation as to why they're against the prenup.
Well, I've had 2 inquiries about a year ago, and the women wanted to do the sessions with me, and neither of the men did, and both ended up getting married very quickly, didn't get the prenup, didn't have the sessions with me, and I just don't think it will last. You can kind of tell if you don't do this work, the sort of love bombing and the whirlwind, it just will not end well, unless they then kind of work on it, I think. So you don't obviously need to come to a professional. You can kind of work through some questions together, but I really think you need to have the conversations, otherwise it's just a huge red flag, as you say.
Yeah, interesting. I was having this conversation with a client recently who are getting a divorce, and they've just settled they've come to their financial settlement, and he said, I wanted a prenup, and her reaction was, if you want a prenup, I'm not going to marry you. And he was like, I really wish I'd listened to that red flag. And it's 10 years down the line, and sadly the couple haven't made it work because there was no conversation. The conversation was just shut down, and then there was no follow-up conversation in terms of, as you say, the questions that are asked around that time. And it's so important. And unfortunately, our relationship with money and the shame that's associated is still getting in the way. And yet the world has changed so much, so drastically, that it needs to be talked about. Interesting as well what you said earlier about, and I hadn't considered this, that there is this kind of money is the root of all evil, money is bad, especially I'd say in our culture in this country, around kind of, people with money are arrogant, they're showy. It's not good to be showy. It's almost not good to have money. And I think quite often we focus on people having a scarcity mindset. But I know as well myself, my own money stories, is having that fear of success, of what that would mean to your relationships if you got if you were doing too well. I was doing very, very well in my career, and actually had just gone through my divorce, which was really difficult. But financially, I was doing very well at work in my career. And I was told by 2 people very close to me that I was getting too big for my boots. And that, again, you think your money stories are just from your childhood, but they're not. They continue. And you can have that fear of success as well, because there is such a shame around doing well almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And those sort of new levels, new devils, the money mindset work is not a one-off. It is something that at that next pay rise, at the next thing that happens, it's almost like, who am I? What do I get to do if I have more money? Because, and I find this more with my female clients, that they actually want to give, they want to either get rid of it as quickly as it comes in. And I think that, again, comes from not feeling safe around having it, but also just reframing it to, well, actually, if I'm able to build this up, I can do more good. I can enjoy my own life, but also improve other lives, or do something, again, that aligns with your values, that you can be more philanthropic and really think about where you're spending your time and your money. And when you have more money, you have more choice. And in that is in, where it goes, who it goes to. So I often say that actually with people who come to me to ask about investing for their children for junior ISAs, and I said, well, have you sorted yours out as well? Because if you are able to build up your own, you can then choose to give some of that to your children. But if you're just giving to your children and not building up your own, that's a bit of an imbalance. So I like to say to people, you're working on your own, putting your own wealth as well. But I see it as a really common thing. And as you earn more, feeling a bit unsafe around that. And it really matters who you surround yourself by. So if you've got two people close to you saying, you're earning a bit much now. Like I remember when I started out with my own business, someone trying to be kind said, well, you should charge £50 an hour. You don't want to be seen to be too much. I was just like, you have no idea. But if I'd have listened to that, my business would have been tiny. I would not have been able to have the impact. I would not have been able to give from what some of the revenue I make. And it's who you surround yourself with is very, very important. Aligning on values, but also seeing what's possible. If you're sort of asking what your friends are investing in with a portion of their paycheck, that's great to hear. You don't want to be with people who are just sort of spending it all, buying all the latest fads, making it all very sort of social media friendly, but actually having nothing really behind to show for it. So I think, people around you definitely have an impact. And I think people actually don't like when you change. And there's a really good book called Working Identities by Herminia Ibarra. And it's so good about when you go change, others don't like it, particularly in your nearest circle. So actually, if you go and get a better job, and earn a lot more money, and sometimes a skill that meant you were a teacher to start off with, but then means actually you can go and be hired by Google DeepMind, for example, and you suddenly massively increase your salary, just for example, that can make other people feel uncomfortable. But actually it's because you've gone and done something different. So actually being clear on what's possible when you change is important.
Yeah, it's also, you're so right. And the other thing that I always try and remember around those people is, are they doing well? Are they doing what you want to be aspiring to do or not? Because quite often you find that the people who are saying you're too big for your boots, or they don't like the fact that you've changed, is because you've grown bigger than where they are at. And that's
Totally.
not a reflection of you. It's a reflection of their own limitations and their own self-limiting beliefs. And it triggers them and it brings up things for them that they need to deal with. It's not actually anything to do with you. So actually,
Absolutely.
if you're listening to the people who you've outgrown, that's quite telling.
And people want to keep you safe, actually, if you're thinking about it, not as in a malicious way, although I think some people will be jealous and sort of say, oh, it's easy for you, or so lucky, all these things, which actually are really unhelpful to hear, because actually, no, quite often it's not luck, it's hard work and effort. But I think, remembering they're trying to keep you safe, and actually it's just something that they don't know. So they actually say, oh, you're actually doing fine as you are. You don't need to go and do that. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for keeping me safe. A bit like your brain tries to keep you safe from things. Thank you, brain. But actually, I'm going to do this other thing and it's going to be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always trying to be out in the stretch zone, not the comfort zone.
Yeah.
So also you mentioned earlier about having these conversations again and the change in identity that you have when you earn more money and at different stages of your life. One of the biggest shifts in relationships in particular, if you've got through, maybe you have a prenup, maybe you've had those conversations up front, you've planned for the future, but then children come along and your priorities change. And you and I are both mothers of fairly young children. And I don't know about you, but I changed a lot when I became a mum. And even though I thought I knew what that would all be about, I had lots of nieces and nephews. I'd seen my sisters go through it. I had all these ideas, but then when you're in it, it is different. What are the conversations?
I don't think anything prepares you really.
No, but what are the conversations that need to happen then? What's the best way to navigate that huge transition in your life, in your relationship, in potentially your values? Because that's when a lot of things change, or a lot of your values get kind of challenged, or the rubber really hits the road. So how do you prepare couples for that kind of time in life, and what should couples be thinking about?
Well, I mean, not necessarily to do with money, but to make sure that they're carving out time for each other. Definitely. So they've still got time where they're talking as two adults rather than stuff that's just baby related. And I always say to have the conversations around money and the planning before the children come, before you're tired, before you're going to say, but I did this night feed, I did this nappy change, and then it gets a bit sort of
tit for tat.
Tit for tat, exactly. And that's not helpful. Remembering who you are, the things that you enjoy together. And this again comes back to the values that you have together. And I think valuing contribution to the household is so important, because I don't know about you, but I mean, I had my first during lockdown. It was COVID. It was awful, basically being in the house. And I think, doing something where it's so repetitive, especially those early stages where you're not used to it. You're used to being the one who's sort of like the high earner, the productive person who's go, 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 and actually then being at the mercy of a small baby who's totally reliant on you. Actually just, wanting to that work to be acknowledged, because it's a different type of work. And I think, it's amazing how much, and nowadays it's like both parents do so much, I think, well, quite often do a lot more than previous generations would have done. And I think it's about valuing contribution, valuing what you're doing, so that it might not be on a monetary basis, but actually saying, kind of being seen for what you're bringing to the house. I think that can be quite big, even though actually it doesn't take very much to say thank you for doing that, or I'm seeing you do that. I think those sort of acknowledgements of how much that might mean to someone is quite a big one. And then, it's that time piece as well. So not just what you're going to decide to spend on together, especially in maternity leave, or even parental leave, if there's going to be a dip in income, just sort of early on planning, what's the flow of the money going to be over 12 months? Are we taking 12 months? Are we taking 9 months? Like, what's it actually going to be? And I'm the financial coach in Nugget Savings kind of community, and they've got a really good template for how you can do your finances over maternity leave, where you've got both salaries coming in, and just seeing that at the beginning you might be getting your full pay, you can put the other half's pay in as well, and then as a household what's coming in, so that in those latter months when it may be statutory pay or no pay, that you almost want to smooth it out or be saving in advance for it. So I think you can be quite practical about that, but I also think you need to have the conversations around value, contribution that aren't monetary, because money there isn't often quite as much at the end of maternity leave.
Yeah.
You don't want to be asking to buy a cup of coffee out.
No, particularly if they're on a golfing holiday. I mean, that's just
made me so cross.
Are they still together? Do you know?
Yeah. But with a lot of sort of sacrifices on her behalf.
And say it sounds like one-sided. So yeah, what you've just said in terms of the contribution, because that's where I see a lot of the resentment. Because it's easy to articulate value based on money, but not so easy to articulate value on non-tangible contribution. And that is so hard for couples and individuals as well. As you said, when you've gone from kind of bossing it almost to, now I have a boss and it's tiny and wrinkly and it keeps telling me what to do and I have to lamp to its tune. It's really hard.
Yeah.
And 85% of parents feel burnt out, and I know I did. I just thought I could carry on. I just thought that's okay. I'm just going to pivot my business and do this whilst having a baby. I never had a maternity leave. I had about 2 weeks, and then I was kind of researching and working and building and doing stuff in the background. So I never really had a maternity leave with either of mine. I keep seeing this again on social media. Probably pissed off mums actually, going, so a cook costs this and a cleaner costs that and a nanny costs this and a housekeeper costs that. So my annual salary should be.
Yeah.
And when you look at it like that, you go, wow, and you never switch off. So
no. Well, even pre-children paid for quite a lot of help, because I knew that was what was going to make a happy, healthy relationship. So lots of hours each week of a cleaner, and knowing that I'd have to change the bedding and do the washing, and having fresh fruit and veg chopped up for the fridge means that we're going to definitely get healthy stuff. So I think I like it when I talk to my clients about saying what would make your life easier and what can you pay for, because quite often there might be a resistance around, I can clean myself. It's like, yeah, you can, but you don't have to. Someone I was working with in the summer was cleaning her house from 10 o'clock at night till midnight, because that was the time she could do it with a young child. Top job. And you just think, you don't need to do that. You can pay for a cleaner. But she would get a cleaner, and then in her head would be her mother's voice being like, but you can do this. It's like, of course, just because you can doesn't mean you should. It's not whether you're capable of it, do you have capacity to do it? And so it's then saying, what's the narrative going on in my head here that I can't get a cleaner? And there's a lot of people who don't feel comfortable doing that. And it's one of the things that I encourage the most, that actually And even I've had a few clients where I've kind of got them to find a local student who comes and cooks and drops off meals for them, for the family, or for a couple where if you're working all hours, to have someone drop off your meals for the evening. There are loads of, I'm based in London. There are lots of people who are willing even to buy the ingredients and cook it and drop it off. And if it's only like £200 for the week, you're probably going to spend more than that on a delivery service. Yeah. And this way you can choose what it is. So sometimes people will say, oh, I'd love to have like a chef. I'd love to have this thing. It's like, well, actually, what would it cost? And that's one of the sort of fun parts of my job of actually when I'm helping people, is thinking, if you wave a magic wand, what's different? And actually, what can we then pay for with that? Because that is such a good use of someone's money.
Yeah.
I'm quite proud that I pay for lots of help, because it means I'm a better mum. One of my top values is connection and connection time. I'm much more likely to have connection time with my children, laughing, having a nice time with my husband. If I haven't done everything in the house, cooked for everyone, I'm lucky my husband likes cooking. And I like cooking too. But if you are doing all the jobs and running a business and want to do pick up and drop off, all these sorts of stuff, it's you've got to choose which bits you're going to do.
Yeah, I love that. Sadly, I live out in the countryside, so
never know who is in your village or town.
That's true. We've struggled even to get a good cleaner. There's definite need for someone to set up a business out away. So what would be your top takeaways for, couples listening to this podcast around how they kind of really get on top of their money and make it not a bone of contention as it is for so many people? What would be your top tips for people to take away?
So I think get a picture of where you are today. What's in your bank account? Have you got any investments? You've got a pension. If you have a pension, you're already an investor. Debunking that myth that you can't be an investor. Just basically putting on a sheet of paper, each of you, like, what have you got? What would you actually like? How would you like each year to be made up? What are the things that are going to go through there? You'll know what time of year your birthday is. You'll know when Christmas is. Maybe you want to go on holiday once a year. Maybe you want to go on holiday 4 times a year. Just kind of jot down what would you like and what's happening now and what's the gap? What do you need to get to that place? And then people don't like thinking about pensions in the future, but actually, are you putting enough aside for the future that you're going to have a comfortable retirement? Size of pension pot you need for a comfortable but not extravagant pension is retirement is 842,000 in a pot. But most people, if they want to have a kind of nice lifestyle, it needs to be over £1 million. What are you putting in now that's going to give you a comfortable, enjoyable retirement? And then do the work on your relationship with money. So what messages are you telling yourself around money today? What behaviours are you seeing? What did you hear about money growing up? And have the conversation. Have a think about it individually and then have a conversation together. And you can be quite vulnerable, but then together thinking about, well, actually, what do we want for our family, our couple, our lifestyle, and just then giving your pounds that purpose rather than just spending, because it's so easy to spend each week and then not have saved that month. And then it's a year later and you've still not made that pot any bigger. And small tweaks, you can make a difference.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Philly. That's been absolutely brilliant. Such a good conversation. And we will put all of Philly's details in the show notes, as well as links to the charities as well that were mentioned earlier. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.